Sleep on my porch or share my bed. Those are the only choices I've got." The words hit the woman like a slap, and every man in the yard went silent. She didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She reached into her worn leather suitcase, pulled out a thin gray blanket, and spread it across the splintered porch boards without a single word. The cowboy watched her lie down in the cold, and something inside him cracked. If you love a story about a woman who refused to be broken, subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I want to see how far this story travels. The ranch was dying, and Colt Brennan had stopped pretending otherwise. He stood in the doorway of the main house with a cup of cold coffee going colder in his fist, watching the last light drain out of the Montana sky, and he counted the things he'd lost, the way a man counts coins he no longer has. Half the herd gone. 12 good hands who'd ridden off when the wages stopped. A wife buried 3 winters back beneath a wooden cross he could see from the porch if he looked, which he didn't anymore. And the land itself, the land his father had bled for, carried a red mark in the bank's ledger down in town that meant it wasn't really his land at all. Not for long. Colt. Wesley, his foreman, came up the steps slow, favoring the leg a horse had crushed 2 summers ago. The Hendricks boy came by. Says the bank's talking about the auction date again. Let 'em talk. They're saying September. Colt drank the cold coffee like it was medicine. Then I've got till September. Wesley was quiet a moment. He was near 60, gray as a dawn sky, and he'd worked this ground when Colt was a boy, small enough to ride on his shoulders. "You know I'd stay if there wasn't a dollar in it for me," the old man said. "Some of the others feel the same. But some of 'em got families, Colt. They can't eat loyalty." "I know what they can't eat, Wes." The words came out harder than he meant. He softened them barely. "I'm not asking anybody to starve for me. That ain't what I know." The 2 men stood in the failing light and said nothing, because everything worth saying had already been said, and none of it had changed a thing. Below them, in the long shadows of the bunkhouse, a few of the remaining hands moved like men who'd forgotten what they were working toward. 20 of them left. 20 men eating through a pantry that was 3/4 empty, working a ranch that was 1 auction away from belonging to somebody else. That was when the woman came up the road. Colt saw her before Wesley did, a figure on foot at the far end of the wagon track, walking the way people walked when they'd been walking a long time. Not the loose stride of someone out for air. The grinding, dogged step of someone who'd run out of other options a good many miles back. She carried a single case in one hand, and even at that distance he could see it dragged at her shoulder like it was full of stones. "Somebody you know?" Wesley asked. "No." "Drifter, then?" "Looks like." They watched her come. She didn't hurry. When a dog broke from the barn and barked at her, she stopped, let it sniff her hand, and kept walking. And something about that, the way she didn't fear the dog, the way she didn't fear anything that Colt could see, made him set his cup down on the porch rail and straighten up. She reached the bottom of the steps and stopped. Up close, she was younger than her walk had suggested, 25 maybe, with dust ground so deep into her skin it looked like part of her. Her dress had been a decent dress once. Her hands, when she shifted the case from one to the other, were a working woman's hands, scarred across the knuckles, the nails broken short. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They didn't drop. They didn't plead. They took his measure the way he'd just taken hers, and found him wanting and didn't bother to hide it. "Evening," she said. "Evening. I'm looking for a night's shelter, just the one. I can pay in work." Behind Colt, Wesley shifted his weight. A few of the hands had drifted closer, drawn by the novelty of a stranger, and Colt could feel them watching, could feel the whole ranch waiting to see what the man with nothing would do with one more mouth asking to be fed. And something turned mean inside him, not because of her, because of everything, because of September, and the empty pantry, and his father's cross on the hill, and 3 years of watching the thing he loved die by inches while he stood there helpless. Because every day somebody wanted something from him, and he had nothing left to give, and here was one more, and he was so tired of being asked. I got no shelter to give, he said. I got a porch and I got a house full of tired men. That's the whole of it. A porch is fine. Is it? He heard his own voice go flat and cruel and couldn't seem to stop it. You want the truth, lady? Here's the truth. I got exactly 2 things to offer. A woman shows up at my door at night with a suitcase. You can sleep on my porch. He let it hang. Or you can share my bed. Those are the only choices I've got. The yard went dead silent. He'd meant it to shame her, to send her walking, to make her someone else's problem the way everything was somebody's problem to somebody. He watched her face for the flush, the anger, the tears, the reaction that would let him feel like he'd won something, even something ugly. It didn't come. Abigail Turner looked at him for a long, level moment. Then she set her case down on the bottom step, unlatched it, and drew out a thin gray blanket folded small from long carrying. She climbed the steps past him, close enough that he caught the road dust smell of her, and she spread the blanket out on the bare porch boards, and she knelt and she lay down on her side, with her arm folded under her head, facing away from him toward the dark. She didn't say a single word, and Colt Brennan stood there holding his cruelty like a knife that had turned in his own hand. He went inside because he couldn't think of anything else to do. He shut the door. He stood in the dark kitchen with his heart going hard and his face hot, and he listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The hands murmuring their way back to the bunkhouse, a horse blowing in the corral, the wind coming down off the ridge the way it always did. And under all of it, silence from the porch. She wasn't crying. She wasn't leaving. She was just lying out there in the cold, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like a man's cruelty was weather she'd learned to sleep through. That was low, Wesley said. The old man had come in behind him. Colt hadn't heard the door. I don't need it from you tonight, Wes. You're gonna get it anyhow. Wesley set his hat on the table. I've knowed you since you were knee-high. I knowed your daddy. And your daddy never in his life talked to a woman the way you just talked to that one. My daddy had a ranch worth talking about. Your daddy had less than you got right now more than once, and he never... She could have left. It came out of him too loud. She could have turned around and walked and been somebody else's charity case. I gave her a way out. You gave her a slap and called it a door. Wesley picked his hat back up because there was no reason to stay. She's tougher than you. That's what's got under your skin. You tried to break her, and she wouldn't break, and now you gotta lie awake, knowing what kind of man does that to a stranger. He put the hat on. Good night, Colt. The door shut, and Colt was alone with it. He lay awake a long time. His bed had never felt so much like an accusation. Then, he was up before the sun, the way he always was. And when he opened the door, the blanket was already folded. She was gone from the porch, but not gone from the ranch. He found her around the side of the house at the woodpile sleeves, shoved up splitting kindling with an axe she'd found somewhere. And she was doing it right, letting the weight of the blade do the work, stacking the split pieces in a neat pyramid against the wall. She'd been at it a while. The pile said so. What are you doing? He said. It wasn't a question. It was a man off balance and grabbing for solid ground. Abigail set the axe head down and looked at him. In the gray light she looked even younger and even harder both at once. You've got wet wood in your kindling box, she said. It won't catch. Your fire's been smoking the men out of the kitchen every morning, I'd guess, and nobody's had time to fix it. So I fixed it. I didn't ask you to. No, you told me I could sleep on your porch or in your bed. Her voice didn't rise. That was the terrible thing about her voice. It never had to. I chose the porch. I slept on it. Now it's morning, and I told you I'd pay in work, and I don't like to owe a debt, so I'm splitting your wood. She picked the axe back up. You can watch if you want, or you can go on and run your ranch. I'll be gone by noon. He should have let her go. That was the sensible thing. One less mouth. One less problem. Instead, he heard himself say, Where you headed? The axe paused mid-swing, just for a breath. Then it came down and split the log clean. Nowhere in particular, she said. That's usually where roads like mine go. And Colt Brennan, who had lost the habit of curiosity somewhere in the last 3 years, stood in his own dooryard and found he wanted badly to know who this woman was. The trouble started at breakfast, the way trouble on a ranch full of hungry men usually does. He'd told her she could eat before she left. It was the least he could do, and the most he could bring himself to offer. So she came into the kitchen, where the hands crowded the long table, and the talk died the way it had died in the yard, and every man in the room looked first at her and then sidelong at Colt, because they'd all heard. 20 men, and not one of them had missed a word of what he'd said on that porch. And now, here she was among them, and the shame of it filled the room like smoke. A young hand named Duffy, 19 cocky, still too young to know what silence meant, was the one who broke it. "So you're the porch gal," he said, and grinned around the table for approval. "Heard you had your pick of accommodations." Colt's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, but before he could say anything, before he could even decide whether he had the right to, Abigail set down the plate she was carrying. She looked at Duffy the way a school teacher looks at a boy who's about to learn something. "I did have my pick," she said, pleasant as morning. "And I picked the boards over the offer, which is more than I can say for the manners in this room. You want to know something about a porch, mister?" She leaned a hand on the table. "A porch don't lie to you. It's hard, and it's cold, and it tells you exactly what it is, and you know right where you stand with it. It's the offers that come with a soft bed you gotta watch out for." She straightened. "But I don't expect you'd know much about offers yet. Eat your eggs." Somebody laughed. Then somebody else. Then the whole table was laughing. Not at her, Colt realized, but at Duffy, who'd gone red to the ears, and there was a warmth in the sound that hadn't been in that kitchen in longer than Colt could remember. Wesley at the far end hid a smile behind his coffee. And Abigail Turner picked her plate back up and went on serving as if nothing at all had happened. Colt watched her move around the room and understood, with a slow, cold certainty, that whatever he'd thought was walking up his road last night, he'd been wrong about it. This wasn't charity showing up at his door. This was something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. She meant to be gone by noon. He was already trying to figure out how to make her stay. Noon came, and she didn't leave. Not because he asked. He didn't ask. He didn't know how to. But when noon came, Wesley found her in the storeroom off the kitchen, a room nobody had truly entered in a year, and she was on her knees in the middle of a mess of spilled grain and mouse-chewed sacks and rusted tools, and she had a scrap of paper propped on a crate, and she was writing. "What's all this?" Wesley said. Abigail didn't look up. "Your ranch is losing money it doesn't have to lose," she said. "I found 4 sacks of good feed gone to mold because they were stacked on the wet floor instead of the pallets somebody built and then never used. I found a plow blade under a tarp that just needs the rust taken off. I found 3 lanterns that only need wicks." She finally looked up, and there was something lit behind her eyes now. Something that hadn't been there on the porch. "You're not poor the way you think you're poor. You're poor the way a man is poor who's got money in his coat and doesn't know which pocket." Wesley crouched down beside her, his bad leg protesting, and looked at the paper. It was a list, a careful one. Numbers down one side. Losses. He'd worked this ranch 40 years, and he'd never once thought to write it down like that. "You do this before?" he asked. "This kind of work, keeping the count of things." Something crossed her face quick there, and gone a shadow of a bird across a field. "I did some clerking," she said. "Once, a while back." For who? And there it was again, that half-second stillness he'd seen when Colt asked where she was headed. That little catch like a foot finding a loose stair in the dark. "Doesn't matter," Abigail said and went back to her list. "It ended badly. Most things do." Wesley let it lie. He was old enough to know when a person had a room in them, they kept the door shut on, and old enough to know that pushing on that door was a good way to get it slammed on your fingers. But he took the memory of that catch, that shadow, and he put it away somewhere careful, the way you save a thing you might need later. He didn't know yet how much he'd need it. God. When Colt came in at dusk, Dead tired from a day spent chasing strays out of a broken fence line, he found his kitchen changed. The floor was swept, the smoking stove drew clean. The chaos of the storeroom had been sorted into stacks he could actually read, and there was a smell in the air. He hadn't smelled in that house since his wife was alive, the smell of a real meal cooking made careful, made by someone who cared how it turned out. And there was a piece of paper on his table weighted down with a stone. He picked it up. It was the list. Her list. Every loss the ranch was bleeding, laid out plain, the moldered feed, the rusted tools, the wasted lantern oil, a dozen small hemorrhages he'd been too beaten down to see. And at the bottom, in a neat small hand, 3 words that hit him harder than the whole accounting above them. This is fixable. He stood there a long time with the paper in his hand. Abigail came in from the back with an armload of the kindling she'd split that morning. She saw him holding the list and stopped in the doorway, and for a moment the two of them just looked at each other across the warm, changed room. "I'll be gone in the morning," she said. It sounded this time almost like a question. "No?" Colt said. The word surprised them both. He set the list down. He didn't know how to do this, didn't know how to walk it back the porch. The cruelty, the thing he'd made her sleep through in the cold. So he did the only thing a man like him knew how to do, which was to talk about the work. "You said it's fixable." His voice came out rough. "The ranch. You said it's fixable." "I said the waste is fixable. The bank's a different animal. But the waste, you could—" He stopped, started over. "If a person knew how to do what you did today, sort it out, keep the count of it, see the money in the pockets." He made himself look at her. That person'd be worth wages a man doesn't rightly have. But they'd be worth a roof, and a real bed in a room with a door that locks from the inside, and my word in front of every man on this place that nobody touches it. The silence stretched. "I said a low thing to you last night," he said. It cost him. She could see it cost him. "The lowest thing I ever said to anybody. I'm not going to insult you by explaining why. But I'm asking you to stay and fix my ranch, and I'm asking as a man to a woman he was wrong about. That's all I got to offer. Work and a locked door and my apology, which I know isn't worth much." Abigail Turner stood in the doorway with her arms full of split wood and looked at the man who'd wounded her 20 hours ago, and Colt could not for the life of him read what was moving behind her eyes. "A locked door," she said finally. "From the inside. You keep the only key." She was quiet another moment. Then she crossed the room and stacked the kindling in the box beside the stove, the dry box now, the one she'd fixed, and she straightened up and wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "I'll stay through the fall," she said. "Long enough to teach your foreman to keep the books so the ranch doesn't slide back the day I leave, not a day past the first snow." She held out her hand, and it was a strange thing, a man and a woman shaking hands over a stove, like two ranchers closing a cattle deal. "And Mr. Brennan, the door locks, but that was never the part I was afraid of." He took her hand. It was rough and small and strong. "Then what were you afraid of?" he said. And the shadow crossed her face again, the bird across the field, the loose stare in the dark. And she took her hand back and she said, "Staying long enough, anywhere to be found." She turned to the stove before he could ask what she meant. He didn't ask. But he heard it, and he kept it. And that night, for the first time since the third winter, Colt Brennan lay in his bed and thought about the future instead of the graves. She was true to her word and more. Inside a week, the whole rhythm of the ranch had shifted under her hands. She never gave an order that was the thing the men noticed first, and then couldn't stop noticing. She'd just be there before dawn doing the worst job on the place, and a man would come along and find himself doing it with her, and by the time he understood he was working, he was halfway done and somehow proud of it. She set the schedules by asking each hand what he was best at, and then putting him to it, so that for the first time in years, the men were doing work they didn't hate. She got the moldered feed replaced and the rest of it up on the pallets. She had Duffy, cocky red-eared Duffy, who now followed her around like she'd hung the moon, greasing and mending every rusted tool in the place, until the storeroom held a working ranch's worth of equipment again, and then she went after the irrigation ditch. It ran up the north pasture, an old cut Colt's father had dug by hand 40 years back, long since collapsed and silted and given up for dead. Every man on the ranch would have told her it was beyond saving. Wesley did tell her flat out. "That ditch is done," the old man said. "Been done since before Colt's daddy passed. You'd need 20 men a month to clear it, and you got 20 men and 100 other things need doing." "I've got 20 men," Abigail agreed, "and a north pasture that could carry twice the cattle it carries now if it had water. So the question isn't whether we can afford to clear the ditch, Mr. Wesley. The question is whether we can afford not to." She looked up the length of the ruined cut, shading her eyes. "Your father dug this with his own 2 hands, they tell me. Because he could see the water coming down it even when there was no water there yet. That's not a dead ditch. That's a promise somebody made to this land a long time ago." She rolled her sleeves. "I don't like to see a promise go to waste." They cleared it in 3 weeks. The men grumbled the first week and worked the second, and by the third, they were racing each other down the line, and the day the water came down that old cut for the first time in a generation, brown and slow. At first, then clear running, clean into the cracked north pasture. Every hand on Red Canyon Ranch stood along the bank and watched it come, and not one of them said a word, because some things are too big for words. Wesley took off his hat. Duffy actually wept and was too happy to be ashamed of it. And Colt stood beside Abigail on the bank and watched his father's promise keep itself at last, and he turned to say something to her. Thank you, or more than thank you. And found she wasn't watching the water. She was watching him. And for a moment before she looked away, he saw something in her face that had nothing to do with ditches, or feed sacks, or the keeping of accounts. Something that scared them both. "It's good water," she said quickly, and turned back to the pasture. "Yeah," Colt said. "It is." Neither of them moved for a while. Tug. He started finding reasons to be near her. He wasn't proud of it, and he didn't fully understand it, but there it was. A man who'd spent 3 years alone with his grief found that the grief had gotten quieter somehow in the weeks since a woman had lain down on his porch and refused to be broken. He'd come in from the range, and there'd be a plate kept warm for him. He'd be wrestling with the tally of the herd, and she'd sit across the table and take the numbers out of his hands and make them behave. In the evenings, more and more, they'd end up on the porch, that same porch, sitting a careful distance apart, and they'd talk. Not about anything. About the ranch. About the men. About whether the winter would come early. Never about her. He'd learned that much. There was a door in her he wasn't allowed to open, and he'd stopped trying the handle. But he watched her the way she flinched at the sound of a wagon coming up the road, the way her eyes went to the horizon whenever a rider appeared, the way she'd asked him casual as anything. But he'd caught it, whether the old survey records from his father's time were still kept anywhere on the property. Somewhere, he'd told her. In the old office in the east barn, probably. Boxes of my daddy's papers. Why, a ranch this old should know its own boundaries, she'd said, in case the bank ever gets particular. And she'd smiled and changed the subject, and he'd let her. He shouldn't have let her. The rider came on a Thursday. Colt was in the near corral working a green colt when he heard the hooves on the road, and he looked up and saw a man in a black town coat come up the wagon track at an easy trot, the way men rode when they carried papers that gave them the right to. Beside Colt, at the corral fence, Abigail had been holding the colt's lead rope. Colt heard the rope hit the dirt. He turned. She'd gone white bone white, the color gone clean out of her face, and she was staring up the road at the rider like she was watching her own grave dig itself. "Abigail." She didn't answer. She was already backing away from the fence. "Abigail, who is that?" "Get me the survey records," she said, and her voice was somebody else's voice, low and fast and shaking. "Tonight. Whatever's in your father's boxes, get them before he does." She was almost to the barn corner now, keeping the building between herself and the road. "Colt, please, don't tell him I'm here. Whatever he says, whatever papers he shows you, don't tell him I'm here. Tell me who..." But she was gone around the corner and into the barn's shadow, and the rider was reining up at the corral gate. And Colt Brennan turned to face a stranger with a lawyer's coat and a lawyer's smile, and a leather case, exactly like the one a frightened woman had carried up his road 6 weeks ago. "Mr. Brennan," the man said, touching his hat. "Colton Brennan of Red Canyon Ranch." "That's me. My name is Harlan Pierce. I'm here on behalf of the Cascade Land and Water Company." He swung down off his horse easy, unhurried, a man who'd never in his life been on the losing side of a conversation. He reached into the case. "I'm afraid I've come about the water, Mr. Brennan, specifically about who it belongs to." He drew out a folded document heavy with seals and held it across the fence, and his smile never wavered. "You may want to sit down for this." Colt did not take the paper. He looked at the man's smiling face, and he looked at the case that matched Abigail's case, and he thought about the color running out of her face, and about a woman who'd told him her only fear was staying long enough to be found. And a cold certainty settled into his gut, like a stone dropping into a still pond. Whatever was coming, it had been coming a long time, and it had walked up his road once already carrying a suitcase asking for shelter. "Say your piece," Colt said quietly. "But you might as well know before you start, this ranch has fought for its water before, and it's not near as broke as you were told." Harlan Pierce's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, a flicker of recalculation, a man revising a number he'd thought was settled. "Interesting," Pierce said. "I was told this place was dead on its feet." He unfolded the document with a small, careful crackle of expensive paper. "I was told a great many things about Red Canyon Ranch, Mr. Brennan. I'm beginning to wonder how many of them are still true." Behind the barn wall in the dark, Abigail Turner pressed her back against the wood and closed her eyes, and the name she'd run 300 miles to escape stood smiling in the sunlight 30 feet away. Harlan Pierce spread his document across the top rail of the corral fence and smoothed it with the flat of his hand, and Colt watched him do it and thought that no honest man had ever ironed a piece of paper that lovingly. "Water rights," Pierce said. "You'll want to read this part here." He tapped a line halfway down with one clean fingernail. "The Cascade Land and Water Company holds prior appropriation on the whole of Red Canyon Creek, dated and filed and stamped by the territorial recorder. That means the water that comes off that ridge and runs through your north pasture, the water I'm told you've just gone to a great deal of trouble to bring back, was never yours to bring back. It belongs to my employer, has for 11 years on paper." He looked up, and the smile came back. "And paper, Mr. Brennan, is the only thing a court cares about. My family's watered off that creek for 40 years. I don't doubt it. Lots of men water off creeks they don't own." Pierce refolded the document with the same care he'd unfolded it. "The company's prepared to be reasonable. We're not here to put anybody off his land. We're here to lease you back the use of your own water at a fair rate. Very fair. $1 an acre-foot payable quarterly." He slid the paper into his case. "Or you can fight it in territorial court where you'll lose and lose the land too when the legal costs finish what the drought started. I've made this walk to 100 ranches, sir. I know how the story ends." Colt stood very still. Somewhere behind the east barn, a woman was pressed to the wall with the color gone out of her, and every word this smiling man said was one more nail in a thing Colt was only beginning to understand. "You said $1 an acre-foot," Colt said. "On a place my size, that's $400 a year I don't have." "Then perhaps," said Pierce gently, "it's time to let the place go to men who do." It was said so kindly that it took a moment for the cruelty of it to land. And when it landed, Colt felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not despair, which he knew like an old coat, but the clean hot want to hit a man across a fence rail. He put his hands on the top rail instead and gripped the wood until it hurt. "Leave the paper," Colt said. "I'll read it when I've got the stomach. I'll leave you a copy." Pierce drew out a second document identical and set it on the post. "You've got 30 days to sign the lease or answer the suit. After that, the company files, and the county sends men to shut the head gate on that ditch you cleared." He swung back up onto his horse, unhurried as ever. "It's a pity. Whoever put your pasture back to rights did fine work. I'd have said you had a future here." He gathered his reins. "One more thing, and then I'll trouble you no further. I'm told you took on a hired woman this summer. A bookkeeper. The world narrowed to a point. Who told you that? Colt said. People talk in a small county. A ranch on its last leg suddenly clearing ditches, replacing feed. Keeping its accounts sharp. Folks notice a turn like that, and they wonder who's behind it. Pierce's eyes had gone flat and watchful, all the warmth drained out of them, like water through a cracked pot. The company has an interest in a certain woman, a former clerk of ours. She left our employ under a cloud theft, I'm sorry to say. There's a bond posted for information on her whereabouts. $50 gold. He let that sit. Dark hair. About 25. Scars on her hands from working. Answers to Abigail or did. A pause. You wouldn't have seen anybody of that description. And Colt Brennan, who had never in his life been a good liar, looked the man dead in the eye and told the first easy lie of his adult life. I've got 20 hands and none of 'em's a woman, he said. Never been able to afford a bookkeeper. If somebody's telling you my ranch turned around this summer, they're telling you a fairy story. I cleared that ditch myself with my men because I was too stubborn to die quiet. You want a woman? Go look at some ranch that's actually doing well. Pierce studied him for a long, cold moment. Of course, the lawyer said at last. My mistake. He touched his hat brim. 30 days, Mr. Brennan. I'd sign if I were you. Fighting the company is a thing men do once. And he turned his horse and rode back down the wagon track at the same easy trot he'd ridden up on a man in no hurry at all because time was on his side and he knew it. Colt didn't move until the rider was small on the road. Then he snatched the 2 documents off the post, and he went to find her. She was where he'd left her, back to the barn wall in the shadows, and she flinched when he came around the corner, even though she must have heard his boots. He's gone, Colt said. Did he see me? No. I told him there's no woman on the place. Told him I cleared the ditch myself. He held up the papers. I lied to a lawyer's face for you, Abigail, and I did it before I knew why, because you asked me to. Now you're going to tell me why. All of it. Right now. She looked at the documents in his hand, at the heavy company seal, and her breath went out of her slow and shaking. She slid down the wall until she was sitting in the dirt with her knees up, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. And for a moment, Colt thought she was going to come apart entirely. She didn't. She was made of harder stuff than that, and he should have remembered it. His name is Harlan Pierce, she said low into her hands. He's the company's man, their fixer. When a claim's dirty, and they need it made to look clean, they send Pierce. She dropped her hands and looked up at Colt, and her eyes were dry and terrible. I know him because I worked 3 feet from his office for 2 years. I was a clerk for the Cascade Land and Water Company. And every word he told you about the water rights being 11 years old and filed and stamped, that part's true. She swallowed. What he didn't tell you is that half of what's in that filing was stolen. Colt crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye. Stolen how? The old way. The easy way. Her voice was flat now, the flatness of a person reciting a thing they'd gone over 10,000 times in the dark. The company buys up water rights across a whole valley, one ranch at a time, at prices men take because they're desperate. That part's legal. But there's always a few who won't sell. The stubborn ones, the old families. She looked at him. So the company sends a man to the territorial recorder's office with a stack of documents and a fat envelope, and a few weeks later those stubborn ranchers find out their water rights got filed to Cascade back before they were even born. Dates that don't make sense. Signatures nobody remembers signing. Deeds recorded out of order. And when the rancher goes to fight it, there's the paper-stamped official, and it's his word against the county's own book. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. You can't beat the book, Colt. Everybody knows you can't beat the book. That's the whole trick. They make the lie into the record, and after that the truth is, the thing that looks like a lie. The green colt in the corral behind them stamped in blue, and neither of them heard it. My father's water, Colt said slowly. The creek. My daddy filed on that creek when he broke this ground. I've seen the... He stopped. I've seen a paper, Somewhere, in his boxes. Yes. Abigail's whole body had gone tight. Yes. That's what I need you to understand. That's the whole of why I'm here. She made him sit down. She said the rest of it was too long to hear, crouched in the dirt, and she was right. They sat with their backs against the barn wall, a foot of space between them, and she told him the thing she'd carried 300 miles. 3 years ago, I was reorganizing the company's old survey vault, she said. Nobody wanted the job. Years of dust boxes nobody had opened since the territory was young. And in among the boxes I found the originals. Not the filed copies, the originals. Field surveys in the surveyor's own hands with the real dates. Dozens of ranches across 2 counties, and next to each one the company's filed version. And when you laid them side by side, her voice caught. The real survey of Red Canyon Creek was dated 1849. Your grandfather's time near enough. Water, right first appropriation, clean and true to the Brennan family. And the company's filing claimed 1876, backdated with a signature that didn't match any Brennan that ever lived. I held both papers in my 2 hands, Colt. The lie and the truth side by side in one box. What did you do? I did the stupidest, bravest, worst thing I ever did in my life. I copied them. She let out a broken sound that might have been a laugh. I sat up 3 nights in that vault by lamplight, copying survey after survey, every stolen right I could find. Because I thought, God, I was young. I thought I'd take them to a judge or a newspaper or the federal land office, and I thought somebody would care. I thought the truth was enough. She stared at nothing. It's never enough. The truth is just a thing you have. What matters is who's holding the door when you try to carry it out. Pierce? Pierce found the vault door open one night and me at the desk with a stack of copies in my apron. I ran. I got as far as my own boarding room before the sheriff's men were on the stairs. Her hands had curled into fists on her knees. The company had already been to the sheriff, told him a clerk had been stealing from the strongbox. There was money in my room that I never put there, company money marked easy to find. My word against the record again, always against the record. She turned her head and looked at Colt full in the face, and there was 3 years of running in her eyes. I climbed out a window, and I've been running ever since. There's a warrant with my name on it in 2 counties. That $50 bond Pierce mentioned, that's real. Any man in this valley could turn me in for it and be within his rights, and I'd hang or rot, and the company would sleep fine. The Colt blew again. Far off, one of the hands called to another, an ordinary sound from an ordinary afternoon that had nothing to do with the thing unfolding in the barn's shadow. You said you came here, Colt said, and his voice had gone strange and careful. Searching for something. That day you asked about my daddy's survey records. That wasn't idle talk. No. She didn't look away from him, and he'd give her that always, that when the worst of it came, she didn't look away. The copies I made they took. Pierce burned them most likely, or filed them somewhere I'll never reach. But there was one thing the company never had. One thing that would break the whole scheme wide open. Because it's not a copy. It's an original. The company doesn't even know exists. She drew a breath. Your father, Colt. When the company first came sniffing around Red Canyon 11 years ago, your father wouldn't sell. He was one of the stubborn ones. And the company man of that time before Pierce, he made a mistake. He gave your father a real field survey signed and dated true as part of trying to buy him honest before they decided to steal instead. My father was the surveyor who made it. The world tilted. Colt heard the words and could not for a second make them into sense. Your father, he said, was a territorial surveyor, an honest one, which is why the company got rid of him too, in the end though quieter. Her voice had gone to almost nothing. He surveyed Red Canyon Creek in '76, and he did it true, and he signed it in his own hand, and he gave the original to a stubborn rancher named Brennan, who wouldn't sell his water. And somewhere in your father's boxes, Colt in the East Barn in the old office, in with 40 years of a rancher's paper, there is a survey with my father's signature on it that proves the true date of your water right, and proves the company's filing is a forgery. She was shaking now all over. I didn't come here for shelter. I came here because it's the only place left on this earth where that paper might still exist. Your ranch is the last piece of evidence that I'm not a thief. And you gave me a choice between your porch and your bed, and I chose the porch, and I've spent 6 weeks fixing your ranch and lying to your face about why, because I couldn't tell you the truth until I was sure of you. She finally broke just a little at the very end. And I still don't know if I'm sure of you, but Pierce is 30 days out and there's no time left to be careful. Colt Brennan sat with his back against his own barn and understood that everything the ranch, his father's water, the woman beside him, his own foolish, half-formed hope, all of it now hung on a box of papers he'd walked past 1,000 times and never once opened. And then, under the shock, something colder rose in him. 6 weeks, he said quietly. Colt, 6 weeks you slept on my porch and ate at my table and let my men come to love you, and every day of it you were using this ranch to save your own neck. He stood up. He didn't do it angry. He did it worse than angry. He did it careful, the way a man moves when he's holding a hurt he doesn't trust himself with. You didn't come here to help me. You came here because I had something you needed. The ranch, the ditch, the books, that was you buying my trust. So I'd hand you the one paper that gets you off the gallows. She scrambled up after him. That's not... She stopped. Made herself stop. Made herself be honest because honest was all she had left. That's not the whole of it. But it's not a lie either. Yes, I came for the paper. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise, but I didn't fix your ranch to buy you Colt. I fixed your ranch because it was dying, and I knew how to save it, and I couldn't stand to watch a thing die when I had 2 hands and a head that worked. Her chin came up. You can be angry that I lied about why I came. You've got the right. But don't you dare stand there and tell me the ditch isn't real. That water's real. Your father's pasture is green again, and that's real. I did that warrant or no warrant, and I'd do it again. They stood facing each other in the barn's shadow, both breathing hard, and the 6 weeks lay between them like a body neither of them would name. I trusted you, Colt said. It came out lower and more broken than he wanted. First person I let pass the fence in 3 years, and you had your own reasons the whole time. So did you, she shot back. You didn't ask me to stay because you're a kind man. You asked me to stay because I made you money and quieted your fields. We used each other, Colt Brennan. That's what desperate people do. The only difference between us is I'm about to tell you which box the paper's in, and you never once told me a single true thing about yourself either. That landed. He felt it land. And into the silence from around the corner of the barn came Wesley's voice, old and dry and terrible in its timing. Well, the foreman said, now that's a story. They both spun. Wesley stood at the corner with his hat in his hands, and there was no telling how long he'd been there, but it had been long enough. His face said it had been long enough for all of it. Abigail went white again. Wesley, don't. The old man held up a hand. He came forward slow, favoring the bad leg, and he stopped in front of her and looked at her for a long moment, and Colt braced himself, because $50 gold was a year's wages for a man like Wesley, and everybody on the place knew it. You said your daddy was a surveyor, Wesley said. Name of... Abigail's throat worked. Turner. Elias Turner. Something moved across the old man's weathered face, recognition, and behind it, grief. Elias Turner. Wesley repeated softly. I'll be damned. He turned to Colt. I knowed him. Not well. But he came out here the summer before your daddy passed. Skinny fella, careful hands, kind eyes. Sat at your daddy's table, and the two of them talked half the night about water and the honest way to file it. He looked back at Abigail, and his old eyes had gone wet. He gave your daddy a paper Colt. I was there. Your daddy shook his hand and called him the first honest company man he'd ever met, and Turner said Wesley had to stop and clear his throat. Turner said he wasn't a company man no more, said he'd quit rather than sign his name to a lie, and your daddy took that paper and he put it in his strongbox, and he said, Elias, if it comes to it, this'll be the thing that saves my water when I'm gone. The old man wiped his eyes unashamed. "And then your daddy died that winter, and I clean forgot the whole night till this girl said her name." Colt stared at him. "You're sure?" "Son, I'm 60 years old and I forget where I set my coffee. But I don't forget a good man at a bad table on a hard night. That paper's real. It was real 11 years ago, and it's in that east barn right now, unless the mice ate it." He turned to Abigail, and he did the thing that broke her. After everything the day had thrown, he reached out one gnarled hand and set it on her shoulder, gentle as a father. "Your daddy was a good man, girl. I'm sorry for whatever they done to him after. But you didn't come here on a lie. You came here to finish a thing your father started, and that's about the most honest reason to walk up a road I ever heard." His grip tightened. "And nobody on this place is turning you in for no $50. I'll break the arm of any man that tries, and I'll start with Duffy, who loves you, but can't keep his mouth shut for spit." Abigail Turner, who had slept on a porch rather than let a cruel man see her cry, put her face in her hands and finally did. Colt watched the old foreman comfort her, and the last of his own anger drained out of him and left him hollow and ashamed. She'd lied about why she came, yes, but she'd come to finish her dead father's honest work. She'd come to a stranger's ranch carrying nothing but a warrant and a hope, and she'd spent 6 weeks making his fields live before she ever asked him for a thing. He'd offered her a porch or a bed. She'd been trying to save his water the whole time. "Wesley," Colt said. His voice wasn't steady. "Get lanterns, all of them. And get Duffy and 2 others we can trust and tell them nothing about why." He looked at Abigail over the old man's shoulder. "We're going to that east barn tonight, and we're not coming out till we find your father's paper." The old office in the east barn hadn't been touched since Colt's father died. They'd forced the swollen door and gone in with the lanterns, and the light showed them what a decade of neglect looks like. Boxes stacked to the roof beam, a desk buried under drifts of paper gone soft with damp, a strong box in the corner rusted shut, and over all of it, the sweet rot smell of documents dying slow in the dark. "Everything with your father's hand on it," Abigail said. She'd stopped crying. Work had steadied her the way it always did. Give this woman a task, and she came back to herself. Ledgers, deeds, letters, anything from before he passed. Survey papers, different heavier stock folded in thirds, usually with a wax seal or an embossed stamp from the recorder. Elias always used a particular blue ink for the certification line. "We're looking for blue ink." She was already pulling the first box down. "Careful with the damp ones. If it tears, we've got nothing." They worked through the night. Colt and the 3 hands hauled and sorted. Wesley, whose eyes were failing, but whose memory was long, sat at the cleared end of the desk and read every paper Abigail passed him, hunting the shape of a night 11 years gone. And Abigail went through it all with a clerk's terrible patience, box after box, hour after hour, her hands moving sure and fast, even as the lantern oil burned low, and the men's talk died down into the tired quiet of men who've been awake too long. Twice she thought she had it. Twice it turned to ash in her hands, once a deed for a horse, once an old survey, but the wrong one, a boundary line, no water in it. Each time Colt watched the hope flare in her face and gutter out, and each time it took something out of him to watch. By the 3rd hour, Duffy was asleep, sitting up. By the 4th, the strong box in the corner was the only thing left they hadn't been through, and it was rusted shut hard as a fist. "That's it," Colt said, nodding at it. "That's my daddy's strong box. Wesley said he put the paper in his strong box. Then open it. It's rusted. Then break it." Abigail was on her feet, all the night's exhaustion gone out of her, in a rush of terrible hope. "Colt Wesley watched your father put a paper in a strong box 11 years ago. That's the box. Whatever's in there is what we came for. Break it open." They broke it open. It took the 2 of them and a pry bar, and the better part of 10 minutes, and when the lid finally shrieked back on its rusted hinge, they all crowded in around it in the lantern light. Colt, Abigail, Wesley leaning on the desk. Even Duffy jolted awake and staring. Inside, a few gold coins gone dark. A wedding ring his mother's Colt knew it at once, and his throat closed. a packet of letters tied with faded string, a family Bible with names written in the front. And beneath all of it, at the very bottom of the box, folded in thirds on heavy stock, sealed with wax, a survey. Abigail's hands were shaking too hard to lift it. Colt took it out for her, careful as a man handling a live coal, and he unfolded it under the lantern. And there it was, the map of Red Canyon Creek, the pastures, the headgate, the ditch, his father dug, all drawn true, in a careful surveyor's hand. And down at the bottom, on the certification line in ink still faintly blue after 11 years, surveyed and certified true, this day in the year 1876. Water right of first appropriation, confirmed to the Brennan family. Elias Turner, Territorial Surveyor. The date. The true date. 11 years before Cascade's forged filing, signed in the honest hand of a dead man who'd quit his job rather than lie. The whole room went silent. Abigail reached out one trembling finger and touched her father's signature, and she made a sound. Colt would remember the rest of his life, a small, cracked, wondering sound, the sound of a woman who'd run 300 miles finally touching the thing she'd run toward. "That's his hand," she whispered. "That's my daddy's hand." She looked up at Colt, and her whole face had changed, the fear washed clean off it, replaced by something fierce and shining. "This is it. This breaks them. This is a true survey, an original dated 11 years before their forgery, signed by a certified territorial surveyor. Colt, do you understand what this is? This doesn't just save your water. This proves the whole scheme. Every ranch they stole from this is the loose thread that unravels the entire cloth." She was laughing and crying at once. "We have them. After 3 years we finally have them." And that was the moment the light appeared in the barn doorway behind them. Not lantern light, torch light. And a voice, cold and smiling and unhurried, that Colt had heard once already that day, and had prayed he'd never hear again. "How fortunate," said Harlan Pierce from the doorway, with 2 hard men at his back and a pistol easy in his hand. "I'd hoped you'd find it for me. I've been looking for that particular paper for 11 years. He stepped into the lantern light, and his smile had not one drop of warmth left in it. "Good evening, Miss Turner. You've saved me a great deal of digging." The pistol rose unhurried until it pointed at the survey in Colt's hands. "Now, hand me my property, and we'll discuss which of you lives to see the morning." Nobody moved. Harlan Pierce stood in the doorway with the pistol steady in his hand, and the 2 men behind him spread wide into the room, and Colt Brennan understood in one cold heartbeat that the whole night had been watched. The forced door, the lanterns burning till dawn. Pierce had ridden off that easy trot down the wagon road, and then he'd circled back, and he'd waited in the dark, patient as a spider, letting them do his digging for him. "You followed us," Colt said. "I never left." Pierce's eyes never moved off the survey in Colt's hands. "You're a poor liar, Mr. Brennan. When a man tells you his ranch turned around by luck and stubbornness, and you can see with your own 2 eyes that somebody clever's been at the books, well, a clever somebody was exactly what I came looking for." His smile thinned. "I'll admit you had me half convinced. But then I watched 5 men carry lanterns into a barn at midnight, and I thought to myself, now what does a broke rancher keep in a barn worth losing a night's sleep over? And here we all are." He extended his free hand, palm up. "The paper, Miss Turner. You know how this ends. You've always known." Abigail had gone very still beside Colt. Not the frozen stillness of the corral that afternoon, a different kind. A thinking kind. "You're going to shoot 5 men in a barn," she said, "and explain it to the county how exactly. I'm going to do nothing of the sort. I'm going to take a document that legally belongs to my employer from a woman with a theft warrant in 2 counties, and the men foolish enough to shelter her. If there's shooting, it'll be self-defense against a known thief and her accomplices, and there's a bond posted that proves the county already wants you." Pierce took 1 step closer. "Nobody in this territory will lose a night's sleep over Abigail Turner. That's the beauty of a good forgery, my dear. By the time I was done, even the truth about you was a lie on paper. Now hand me the survey, or I start with the old man, because the old man is the one who remembers the wrong night." The pistol swung lazy and certain until it pointed at Wesley. And Colt Brennan felt the whole of the last 3 years, the grief, the loss, the slow dying burn away in a single white flash of a thing he'd almost forgotten he had. Rage, clean and useful. "Point that anywhere near my foreman again," Colt said very quietly, "and I'll kill you with my hands before your men clear their holsters. You'll get me, but you'll be dead first." He took one slow step, putting his own body between the pistol and Wesley. "You believe that? Look at my face. You believe it." Something flickered behind Pierce's eyes. He believed it. "Colt," Wesley's voice low and steady from behind him, "don't be a fool over me. I'm 60, and I've had my run. Nobody's dying in this barn tonight," Abigail said. She said it with such flat certainty that even Pierce looked at her. "And why is that?" the lawyer asked. "Because you made a mistake, Harlan." She used his first name like a blade. "The same mistake you made 3 years ago when you thought burning my copies solved your problem. You think documents are the danger." She held his eyes. "Documents aren't the danger. Witnesses are. You can burn a paper. You can't burn a memory. And you just walked into a room and threatened in front of 5 living men to murder a witness who watched Elias Turner hand this survey to John Brennan 11 years ago." She let that sink into him. Every man in this room now knows the company's man came in the night with a gun to steal a survey and silence the last witness to a forgery. You can shoot us, but you can't shoot the county recorder we tell in the morning, and you can't shoot the federal land office, and you cannot shoot the story, Harlan, because the story just got 5 new mouths and you handed it to us yourself. The room hung on a knife's edge. Pierce's smile was entirely gone now. He was a man doing sums, and Colt could see the sums going against him. 5 witnesses, a barn full of loyal hands within shouting distance, a killing that would need explaining to a sheriff who might not stay bought if the corpses stacked too high. "Clever," Pierce said softly. "Your father was clever too. It didn't save him." "No," Abigail agreed. "But it's going to save me." For a long moment, it might have gone either way. Then, from the dark of the barn beyond the office door, came a sound that changed everything. The unmistakable oiled iron chunk of a rifle lever throwing around into the chamber. And then another, and another. 3 of them from 3 directions out in the dark where the lantern light didn't reach. "Evening, Mr. Pierce," came Duffy's voice, and gone was every trace of the cocky boy who'd mocked her at breakfast. It had gone hard and grown up all at once. "You'll notice there's more of us than there is of you. And you'll notice we know this barn in the dark, and you don't. More hands. The whole bunkhouse or near it." Abigail had told Wesley to fetch 3 men and tell them nothing, but Wesley was 60 and canny, and he'd told them nothing while making very sure they came armed, and while more of them drifted out to watch the barn than any midnight errand called for. The old foreman had smelled the trap before the trap sprung. Pierce's 2 men had gone rigid, hands frozen halfway to their belts, because a man who draws against 3 rifles he can't see is a man who's already dead and just hasn't fallen yet. "You're outnumbered on my land in the dark, Harlan," Colt said, and now it was his turn to smile, and it wasn't a kind smile. "So here's how this goes. You put that pistol on the floor, and you and your 2 friends walk out of my barn and off my land, and you take your 30 days and your lease and you choke on them, and the survey stays exactly where it is." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Or my men start shooting, and I bury 3 company men in my north pasture, where the grass just came back, and I tell the county you came in the night to rob me. My word against a dead man's. You taught me that trick yourself this afternoon." The pistol wavered. For one heartbeat, Colt thought Pierce would do it anyway, would fire out of pure spite, and let the barn become a slaughterhouse. He'd seen that kind of thing in a man's eyes before, the moment where losing hurts worse than dying. But Harlan Pierce hadn't gotten old in a dangerous trade by dying for spite. He bent slow, watching all of them, and he set the pistol on the barn floor. His 2 men let their hands drift wide and empty. "You've won a night," Pierce said, straightening. All the smoothness had come back over him like water closing over a stone, and that was somehow worse than the gun. Enjoy it. But understand what you've actually got, Mr. Brennan. You've got one old survey and a barn full of ranch hands. I've got the territorial recorder, the county sheriff, 3 district judges, and 11 years of filings that the whole legal machinery of this territory treats as settled fact. You cannot walk that paper into a courtroom in this valley. Every official you'd hand it to, I own, or the company does. He backed toward the door, hands loose. That survey doesn't help you. It just tells me exactly what I have to make disappear. And I am very, very good at making things disappear. His eyes found Abigail's in the lantern light. Ask her. And then he was gone into the dark, his men behind him, and a minute later the sound of 3 horses going fast down the wagon road. The barn let out its breath all at once. Duffy came in from the dark with his rifle still up, and 2 more hands behind him, and Wesley sagged against the desk. And for a moment, there was the loose, shaky relief of men who'd been an inch from dying and weren't. But Abigail hadn't moved. She was staring at the doorway where Pierce had stood, and her face wasn't relieved at all. He's right, she said quietly. He's gone, Colt said. We won. He's right, Colt. She turned, and the fear was back in her eyes, a colder and more grown-up fear than the animal terror of the afternoon. We won the barn. We didn't win anything else. He just told us the truth to frighten us. And the trouble is, it's still the truth. This survey doesn't beat him in a valley court, because he owns the valley court. The recorder's in his pocket. The sheriff's got that bond posted on me. The judges came up through the same land offices the company greased. I could stand in front of any court in this territory and hold my father's honest work over my head, and they would find a way to call it a forgery, and call me the forger, and hang me for it, and Pierce would sit in the back row and smile. Her voice cracked. That's how they beat my father. That's how they beat every rancher in 2 counties. Not because their lie was better, because they owned the room where truth gets decided. The relief died in the barn as fast as it had come. Then what's the paper worth? Duffy asked, and he sounded so young again, so lost, that Colt's chest hurt. We near died for it. What's it worth if no court'll hear it? Abigail looked down at the survey in Colt's hands. Her father's blue ink, the true date, the honest signature of an honest dead man. It's worth everything, she said slowly. In the right room. And it's worth nothing in the wrong one. She lifted her head, and something was working behind her eyes fast. The clerk's mind that had once laid a lie and a truth side by side in a dusty vault, and understood the whole scheme in a single terrible flash. So we don't hand it to the wrong room. We don't file it in this valley. We don't take it to a bought recorder, or a bought sheriff, or a bought territorial judge. She was speaking faster now, the plan building itself as she went. We take it over their heads, above the territory entirely. There's one authority in this whole country the Cascade Land and Water Company doesn't own, because it's too big and too far away, and it answers to Washington, and not to any man in this valley. She looked at Colt. The Federal Land Office, the General Land Office of the United States. Water rights, public land territorial surveys, it all runs up through them in the end. Pierce owns the county. He does not own the United States government. Washington's 1,000 miles away, Wesley said heavily, and Pierce is 30 days out from shutting our headgate. Then we don't go to Washington. Abigail's mind was flying now. There's a federal land office in the territorial capital. The Surveyor General's office, a federal appointee, sent out from back east, rotated through, so no local company has time to buy him proper. If we get this survey and its whole story in front of the Federal Surveyor General with a sworn statement from a witness who saw the original handed over. She looked at Wesley, and the parallel forged filing laid right beside it. Then it stops being my word against the county book. It becomes a federal fraud on public land, and that is a thing no valley judge can bury because it's no longer his to bury. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, thinking. One survey saves your water, Colt. But this survey, plus the pattern, the dozens of ranches, the whole forged filing scheme, put in front of a federal officer, that doesn't just save Red Canyon. That destroys Cascade root and branch and gives every robbed rancher in 2 counties their water back. The barn had gone silent again, but it was a different silence. The silence of men who'd just seen a door open in a wall they thought was solid. "How far?" Colt asked. "To the capital, to this surveyor general." 4 days hard ride, maybe 5. "And Pierce knows it's the one place he can't reach us," Colt said slowly, the whole shape of the thing coming clear to him now. "Which means the second he figures out where we're headed, he stops us on the road," Abigail finished, "long before we ever get there. He doesn't need a court to stop a survey that never arrives. He just needs the road." She looked around the ring of tired, frightened, determined faces in the lantern light. That's what he meant. That's what he's good at, making things disappear before they reach the right room. A rider on a lonely road, a paper that never gets where it's going, that's the easiest disappearance there is. Colt folded the survey carefully and put it inside his shirt against his chest. "Then we don't send a rider," he said. "And we don't send a paper he can find." He looked at Abigail, and something had settled in him hard and clear. The thing that had been dying in him for 3 years, come all the way back to life. "You spent 6 weeks teaching my men to work smart instead of hard. Now we're going to be smarter than Harlan Pierce. Wesley, how many men on this place do you trust with your life?" "All 20, the old man said without hesitating. "Every last one." "Good, because he's going to be watching every road out of this valley by sunup, and we're going to give him something to watch." They didn't sleep. By the gray before dawn, Abigail had it worked out on the cleared desk, the whole of it in the fast, sure hand of a woman who'd spent her life making complicated things simple on paper. Pierce would expect a rider. So they'd give him riders, several going out in several directions at first light, each carrying a leather packet that looked exactly like it might hold a survey. Duffy east toward the railhead. 2 hands south toward the county seat, loud and obvious. A decoy toward Washington's road, the one Pierce would most expect. Let the company chase leather packets full of blank paper all over 2 counties, and the real survey would go the way Pierce would never think to look, because Pierce thought in terms of fast riders and lonely roads, and the real survey wouldn't ride at all. It would go slow. In the supply wagon. Under a load of hides bound for the tannery in the capital, a wagon that made the same dull run twice a season driven by an old teamster, nobody would look at twice. Colt would drive it himself in a teamster's beard and a teamster's slouch, 4 days at an ox's pace, while Pierce's men galloped the fast roads chasing decoys. And Abigail. "I ride the decoy," Abigail said. "The obvious one, Washington's road." "No." "Colt, no." He didn't shout it. He'd learned these 6 weeks that you didn't have to shout at this woman, you just had to mean it. You are the one thing Pierce wants alive as much as he wants the paper, because you're the witness that ties the whole scheme together. You ride out on any road and he takes you, and once he's got you, he doesn't need to guess which packet is real. He'll make you tell him. He held her eyes. "You go in the wagon, with me, under the hides. Nobody looks at a teamster and his wife on a hide run." She stared at him. His wife. "It's cover," Colt said, and felt the tips of his ears go hot like Duffy's, and was glad the lantern was low. "That's all. A teamster and a wife on a supply run is invisible. A woman alone gets stopped and questioned. So you're for 4 days, you're a teamster's wife hauling hides, and there's not a man in this territory would give the wagon a second look." Abigail Turner looked at the man who'd offered her a porch or a bed on the worst night of her life. The man she'd spent 6 weeks lying to, the man who'd just put his own body between a pistol and his foreman, and then dreamed up a plan to smuggle her out of 2 counties under a load of stinking hides. And something moved across her face that Colt couldn't read, and would spend a long time afterward wishing he could. "All right," she said quietly. "A teamster's wife, for 4 days. For 4 days. And when we get there, we walk into the Federal Surveyor General's office, and you lay out the whole thing the way you laid it out for me in that barn, the lie and the truth side by side, the way you found it 3 years ago, and this time there's a witness at your shoulder and a federal officer in the room, and this time somebody cares." He put his hand over the place on his chest where the survey lay. "This time the truth is enough, because we're going to carry it to the one room where it's enough." Wesley cleared his throat from the corner. "You're forgetting one thing." They both turned. "Pierce didn't ride off tonight to lick his wounds," the old man said heavily. "A man like that don't lose the barn and go home to bed. He rode off to fetch more men and to buy the sheriff proper and to close every road tighter than a drum. By noon there's going to be company riders on every crossing out of this valley." He looked at the two of them. "Your decoys'll draw some off, but not all. That wagon's going to have to roll right past men who are looking for exactly what's in it. And if one of 'em's smart enough to pull back a hide, then we're dead," Colt said. "I know. I just wanted it said out loud," Wesley said, "so nobody's surprised." The barn was quiet. Outside, the first birds were starting, and the gray was going to gold at the edges. And somewhere down in the valley, Harlan Pierce was already awake. Colt was certain of it already at the sheriff's door, with a fat envelope already spreading his men across every road, like a man tightening a net. "We roll at first light," Colt said, "before he's got the roads closed. We get out ahead of the net, or we don't get out at all." He looked around at his men, Duffy and Wesley, and the loyal rest faces gray with the sleepless night, and every one of them steady. "You've all heard enough now to hang for it if this goes wrong. Company's got a bond on her, and it'll get one on any man who helped. So I'm telling every one of you, plain anybody wants to walk away, clean, walk now, and no shame in it. This isn't your fight." Nobody moved. Duffy shifted his rifle to his other shoulder. "Ma'am, fix my hands," the boy said to nobody in particular, staring at the floor. "First honest schedule I ever worked in my life that ma'am gave me. Nobody's putting her under a load of hides and driving off alone." He looked up red-eared defiant. "I'm on the East Road with a fake packet, and I'll lead them company men clean to the railhead and buy you 2 days if I have to ride my horse into the ground doing it." And one by one, the others said the same in their own words. The whole loyal 20 of them. And Abigail stood in the middle of it with her hand pressed to her mouth, because she had come here alone with a warrant and a hope. And somewhere in 6 weeks of splitting wood and clearing ditches, and never once giving an order, she had built the one thing the Cascade Land and Water Company, for all its bought judges and forged filings, had never been able to buy. She'd built men who'd stand. "All right," Colt said, and his voice was rough. "All right, then let's move." They loaded the wagon in the dark before the sun cleared the ridge. Colt drove it out of the yard at first light in a borrowed beard and a teamster's slouch hat. An old man to any eye that passed, and under the load of hides in the wagon bed. In a hollow they'd built between the crates lay Abigail Turner, with her father's survey against her heart, and a wool blanket over her, and a canteen, and nothing else for 4 days. The decoys had already gone Duffy east in a cloud of dust loud and obvious, 2 more south, a 4th up the Washington Road riding like the devil was behind him. Somewhere down the valley, Colt could imagine Pierce getting the reports, the packets scattering in 4 directions, the company's men splitting to chase them. The plan was good. Abigail's plans were always good. But as the wagon craked up the first rise out of Red Canyon, Colt saw them down at the valley mouth, where the wagon road met the main crossing, a knot of riders sitting their horses across the road. 6 of them, waiting, stopping every wagon, every rider, every soul that tried to leave the valley, and pulling the loads apart to look. Pierce hadn't waited for noon. He'd closed the roads by dawn, and the only way to the federal land office, and the one room in the world where the truth was enough, ran straight through 6 armed men who were that very minute dragging a farmer's hay wagon apart, board by board, not 200 yards ahead. Colt Brennan pulled his slouch hat low and clucked to the oxen and drove his beloved and the last honest survey in 2 counties straight down the hill toward the men who'd been sent to find them. The oxen took the hill at their own dull pace, and there was nothing Colt could do to hurry them without drawing every eye at the crossing, so he didn't try. He slouched. He let the reins hang loose in an old man's tired hands, and under the hides in the hollow, he heard Abigail's breathing go slow and careful, and controlled the way a person breathes when they've decided to be silent no matter what. 6 of them, he said, barely moving his lips, pitching it low into the wagon bed. They've got a hay wagon torn apart ahead. They're searching everything. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Whatever you hear, you're a load of hides. That's all you are. A single tap against the boards beneath the seat. She'd heard. The riders saw the wagon coming, and 2 of them peeled off the crossing to meet it, walking their horses up the road, easy rifles across their saddlebows. Colt knew neither man by name, but he knew the type, hard-faced, well-paid, the kind of men the company kept for exactly this kind of morning. "Hold up there, old-timer." The nearer one held up a hand. He had a jaw like a shovel and small eyes that went straight past Colt's face to the load in the back. "Where you bound?" "Tannery Run." Colt let his voice crack and go slow, an old teamster who'd made this haul 100 times. "Capital, same as ever. Green hides don't keep, so I'd be obliged if you'd let me roll this heat. They'll turn before I make the flats. Everybody's rolling somewhere this morning." The rider nudged his horse alongside the wagon bed, and Colt watched heart-hammering under the borrowed beard as the man leaned and peered at the load. "Been a lot of traffic off this ranch since dawn. Riders going every direction like somebody kicked a nest. You know anything about that?" "I know hides," Colt said. "I don't know riders. I load at the Brennan place, and I haul to the tannery, and I don't ask the young men their business, and they don't ask me mine, which is how we all stay friendly." The rider grunted. He walked his horse the length of the wagon, and Colt kept his eyes forward and his hands loose, and his whole soul poured down through the boards to the woman lying still as death beneath the hides. The second rider had come up on the other side, both of them looking now. One of them reached out with the muzzle of his rifle and lifted the corner of the top hide and let it fall and lifted the next. "Pull the load," the shovel-jawed one said. "Company wants everything checked to the bed." And Colt's hand drifted slow and casual toward the whipstock beside the seat. And he made the coldest calculation of his life, that if they started pulling hides, he'd have maybe 2 seconds before they found her. And in those 2 seconds, he'd have to decide whether to run the oxen and be shot in the back, or fight 2 mounted men from a wagon seat and die. And either way, it ended with Abigail Turner dragged out from under a load of hides in the road. "Riggs!" A shout from the crossing. "Riggs, leave it!" The shovel-jawed man turned in his saddle. Down at the crossing, one of the other riders was waving his hat urgent, pointing east. "Word come in from Pierce," the man shouted. "They spotted the woman East Road riding for the railhead going like hell. He wants every man on it go where to ride." Duffy, somewhere east, a 19-year-old boy with a leather packet full of blank paper, was leading the whole company on a chase toward the railhead, riding a good horse into the ground, exactly like he'd sworn he would, and buying with his own hide the 2 seconds Colt needed. Riggs cursed and yanked his horse's head around. "Your lucky day, old man," he said, and let the hide fall back. "Roll your stinking wagon and get out of the road." And he spurred east with his partner, and the whole knot of riders broke off the crossing in a thunder of hooves and went pounding down the east road after a decoy, and the crossing was suddenly blessedly empty. Colt Brennan sat frozen for 1 full heartbeat. Then he clucked to the oxen, slow, unhurried, a tired old teamster who'd been waved through, and he rolled the wagon down through the empty crossing and out of Red Canyon and onto the long road to the capital. He didn't let himself breathe until the crossing was a mile behind them. "They're gone," he said down into the boards, and his voice shook. "Abigail, they're gone. We're through. We're out of the valley." For a moment there was nothing. Then, muffled under the hide so quiet he almost missed it, he heard her not words. A sound. The ragged sound of a woman who'd been holding her breath against terror for a quarter of an hour, finally letting it go. "Duffy," she said. It was the first thing she said. Not "we made it." Not "thank God." That was Duffy on the East Road. That was Duffy. "Colt, they'll catch him. 6 of them on fresh horses. Duffy's carrying blank paper and a fast horse, and he knows that railhead country better than any company man alive," Colt said, and he made himself believe it because he had to. "They catch him, they open the packet, they find nothing, and they've lost half a day. He'll lead them a merry chase and slip 'em in the brakes and be drinking in the Railhead Saloon by nightfall, telling the story to anyone who'll buy him a beer. He hoped it was true. He would spend the next 4 days hoping it was true. He knew the risk. He chose it. Don't take that from him by wishing he hadn't. Silence from under the hides. Then, "Can I come out yet?" "Not yet. Not till we're past the next settlement." "You're a load of hides for a while longer, Mrs. Teamster." He heard something that might have been a laugh, worn thin and shaky. "Don't get comfortable with that name, old man." They rode 4 days. By the second morning, she was up on the seat beside him because there was no one on that long road to see, and a teamster and his wife drew no eyes at all in the scattered settlements they passed. Colt kept the beard. Abigail wore a plain bonnet. Wesley's late wife's trunk had given up and pulled it low, and the two of them made the slow haul across the flats at an ox's pace, with the survey sewn now into the lining of Colt's coat, where no casual search would find it. 4 days is a long time on a wagon seat. Longer with nothing to do but talk or not talk and watch the miles crawl. They talked. He learned about her father finally. Elias Turner. The careful, honest surveyor, with the kind eyes Wesley had remembered, who'd raised a daughter alone after her mother died and taught her to read a survey before she could properly read a book. Who'd believed right up until the company broke him that the truth written down plain was a shield that would protect an honest man. He was wrong about that, Abigail said, watching the road. It got him killed being wrong about that. Not a bullet. They didn't need a bullet. They ruined him, took his certification, spread it around, that his surveys were unreliable, made sure no honest man in the territory would hire him. He died in a rented room 3 winters back, with his instruments in a box he couldn't sell because his name was poison. Her jaw was tight. I was clerking for the very company that did it, and I didn't even know. I took the job because it paid, and I was young and I didn't ask enough questions. And then I found the vault, and I understood I'd been drawing wages from the men who killed my father. She looked at Colt. That's the part I never told you. That's why I copied those surveys 3 years ago. It wasn't justice in the abstract. It was my father. I found out what they were 3 feet from Harlan Pierce's office, and I decided I'd burn the whole thing down for what they did to Elias Turner, or die trying. And now you might, Colt said quietly. And now I might. He told her things too. Things he hadn't said out loud in 3 years. About his wife Sarah and the fever that took her the same winter. His father died, one loss on top of the other, until he'd stopped being able to tell them apart. About how the ranch had been the two of them, and then it had been nobody. And how a man alone on dying land forgets a little at a time that he's still a person. You want to know why I said that to you on the porch? He said on the 3rd night, both of them wrapped in blankets against the wagon wheels, the oxen dark shapes on their pickets. That first night, the porch or the bed, you want the true reason. I know the reason, Abigail said. You were drowning, and I looked like one more thing trying to climb on your back. That's the polite reason. He was quiet a while. The true reason is uglier. The true reason is, I wanted to make somebody feel as small as I felt. 3 years of being ground down, and here comes a stranger asking me to be kind, and I hadn't got any kind left, so I reached for cruel, because cruel was the only thing I had enough of to give away. He couldn't look at her. You spread that blanket on my porch and lay down in the cold and didn't say a word, and it was like you held up a mirror. I saw exactly what I'd turned into. I've been trying to walk it back ever since, and I don't know that a man can. Some things you say you can't unsay. The fire popped. Abigail didn't answer right away. No, she said at last. You can't unsay it. A pause. But you drove a wagon through 6 armed men to save my life yesterday, and you've been apologizing with everything except your mouth for 6 weeks, and I've decided that's a different kind of saying, and it counts for more. He felt her look at him in the dark. The man who offered me that porch is dead, Colt. I've watched you kill him a little more every day since. Don't waste what's left grieving him. He didn't have any words for that. So he reached across the small space between them and found her hand rough and small and strong in the dark, and she let him hold it, and neither of them said anything else. And it was the most that had passed between them yet. They reached the capital on the fourth evening, and Abigail's careful confidence, which had carried them 4 days across the flats, began to crack the moment the town closed around them. Because a plan is a clean thing on a barn desk and a dirty thing in the world. And she knew none better how many ways a true paper could still die 3 feet from the right room. "The office opens at 8, she said. They'd taken a cheap room at the edge of town, still playing teamster and wife, and she stood at the window watching the dark street, like Pierce might ride up at any minute. "We go the moment it opens. We don't wait. We don't eat first. We're on the step when they unlock the door, because Pierce has had 4 days, and if there's a company man anywhere in this capital, he's been told to watch that office." You think Pierce guessed. I think Pierce is not a fool, and I think by day 2, he'd worked out that a teamster's wagon left Red Canyon the same morning the decoys did, and I think the one place in this territory he'd station a man to wait for me is the Federal Land Office, because it's the only room I'd ever run to. She turned from the window. He can't touch the survey once it's in the Surveyor General's hands and entered in the federal record. But between here and that man's desk, there's 100 feet of hallway, and Pierce only needs one of those feet. She pressed her hands flat on the windowsill. 3 years, Colt. 3 years and 4 days and 1,000 miles. And it all comes down to whether we can walk one paper across one hallway before a company man puts a hand on my shoulder. Colt came and stood behind her. "Then we don't walk in like fugitives," he said. "We walk in like we own the place. You said it yourself in the barn, the trick isn't the paper, it's the room. So we're going to walk into that room so loud and so public that Pierce can't lay a finger on you without doing it in front of a federal officer and a hall full of clerks." He turned her to face him. "You're not going to slip in scared and hope nobody notices. You're going to walk in at 8 o'clock sharp and announce loud enough for the whole building to hear that you're Abigail Turner, daughter of the surveyor Elias Turner, and you've come to report a federal land fraud. Once that name is spoken out loud in front of witnesses, Pierce can't disappear you. A woman who vanishes quietly is a company problem solved. A woman who's already stood up in a federal office and named the crime. She vanishes. Now it's a scandal that pulls the whole scheme into the light. You make yourself too loud to erase." Abigail stared at him. "That's—" She stopped. A slow, fierce light came up in her face. "That's exactly backwards from everything I've done for 3 years. I've survived by being quiet, by being invisible. And it kept you alive, and it kept you running, and it never once got you to the right room," Colt said. "Being invisible is how they beat your father. He tried to do it careful and quiet and proper, and they ruined him in the dark where nobody was looking. You don't beat these people in the dark, Abigail. You already told me that in the barn, and you were right. You beat them in the one place they can't own out loud in public in front of the federal government of the United States." He held her eyes. "Your father died invisible. You're going to win loud." For a long moment she didn't move. Then Abigail Turner, who had slept on a cruel man's porch rather than let him see her cry, who had run 300 miles in the dark, and the quiet straightened her spine and lifted her chin, and became in front of him the woman who was going to walk into a federal office at 8 o'clock sharp and burn the Cascade Land and Water Company to the ground in broad daylight. "All right," she said, loud. Pierce had a man at the land office. Of course he did. They saw him the moment they came around the corner in the morning, a lean figure in a town coat loitering across the street from the federal building with a newspaper he wasn't reading, and Abigail step-hitched for half a breath before Colt felt her force it steady. "That's Cobb," she said low. "Company man, he knows my face." "Then let's give him a good look at it," Colt said. "Walk, don't run. We're a teamster and his wife with morning business at the land office, and there's not one thing he can do about it on a public street." They walked. Cobb saw them. Colt watched the man's whole body change as recognition landed, the newspaper dropping the sudden stillness, and then Cobb was moving fast, crossing the street at an angle to cut them off before they reached the steps. "Faster," Colt murmured. They didn't run. They walked faster, and the federal building's steps came up, and Cobb was closing, and Colt could see the man's hand moving toward the inside of his coat. And there was one dreadful moment where the whole thing hung on a handful of feet of open street. Colt stopped and turned and put himself square in Cobb's path and said loud in his ordinary voice to the whole waking street, "You want something, friend? You've been eyeing my wife across half the town." Cobb pulled up short, heads turned. A woman sweeping a step paused. Two men outside the land office looked over. And Cobb, who was a company man and good at quiet work and very bad at being the center of attention on a public street, hesitated just 1 second. One fatal second of a man recalculating a job that was supposed to be quiet and had suddenly gone loud. 1 second was all Abigail needed. She went up the federal steps and through the door, and by the time Cobb shoved past Colt and got inside, she was already standing in the middle of the marble hall with her bonnet off and her chin up, and she said it loud, clear ringing off the walls, so every clerk and officer and citizen in that building turned to look. "My name is Abigail Turner. I am the daughter of the territorial surveyor Elias Turner, and I have come to report a fraud against the public lands of the United States committed by the Cascade Land and Water Company, with forged filings and stolen water rights across 2 counties. She turned in a slow circle, letting every soul in that hall hear it, letting it become a thing that had been said in public and could never be unsaid. I have the original survey to prove it, and I demand to see the Surveyor General." The hall went dead silent, and Cobb, 3 steps behind her, stopped cold, because there was nothing left for him to do. He couldn't grab her now. He couldn't silence a woman a dozen federal witnesses had just heard name the crime. The quiet work was impossible. He'd been sent to make a woman disappear, and she'd made herself the loudest thing in a federal building, and Colt watched the man understand. It watched the fight go out of him, watched him back toward the door, because the only move left was to run and tell Pierce that it was already too late. A door opened at the end of the hall. A man came out, older spectacled, a federal appointee from back east, with ink on his fingers and no stake in any valley in the territory, drawn by the commotion. He looked at the woman standing in the middle of his hall, and at the beard and slouched teamster behind her, and at the company man retreating out the door. "Miss Turner," the Surveyor General said slowly. "Did I hear you correctly? A fraud against the public lands." Abigail Turner walked toward him, and she reached into the lining of Colt's coat where he held it open for her, and she drew out her father's survey, the true one, the honest one, the blue ink, and the real date, and the signature of a good man they'd killed for being good, and she laid it in the federal officer's hands. "Every word, sir," she said. "And I've waited 3 years and ridden 1,000 miles to say it in a room you can't buy. Now please, for God's sake," and my father's read it. The Surveyor General unfolded the survey. He read the certification line. He read the date. And Colt watched the man's face change, watched something sharpen behind the spectacles, watched a federal officer of the United States begin slowly to understand exactly what had just been carried into his office under a load of hides. "Mr. The Surveyor General looked up at Colt. "Brennan? Colt Brennan. Red Canyon Ranch. It's my water in that survey, sir, and her father's honest name. And there's an old man back home who watched Elias Turner put that very paper into my father's hands 11 years ago, and he'll swear to it in front of God and any court you name." The Surveyor General looked down at the survey again, then at Abigail. Then he did the thing that ended 3 years of running the thing. Pierce and all his bought judges could never undo the smallest and largest thing in the world. He turned to his clerk. "Enter this into the federal record," he said. "Date and time, and send for the United States Attorney." He looked at Abigail over his spectacles, and something in his old face had gone gentle. "Miss Turner, I think you'd better sit down and tell me the whole of it, from the beginning. Take all the time you need." A pause. "Nobody's going anywhere. You're in a federal office now, and here the papers still mean something." Abigail Turner stood in the middle of the marble hall with the weight of 3 years going out of her all at once, and she looked back at Colt, at the ridiculous beard, at the man who'd offered her a porch, and then driven a wagon through 6 armed men, and taught her to win loud. and for the first time since she'd staggered up his road on the worst night of her life. She smiled with nothing held back behind it. The record was open. The name was entered. Elias Turner's honest work lay in a federal hand, in a federal room, in the one place in the whole of the territory that the Cascade Land and Water Company had never been able to buy. And 1,000 miles behind them, the whole rotten structure of 11 years of forgery began quietly, and then, all at once, to fall. The wheels of the federal government turn slow, but they turn, and once they'd caught the Cascade Land and Water Company in their teeth, they did not let go. It took the United States Attorney 9 days to send investigators back into the valley, and Colt and Abigail rode with them, no longer a teamster, and his wife no longer fugitives, but the two witnesses whose sworn statements had opened a federal fraud case that would soon swallow 11 years of forged filings whole. Abigail led the investigators to the very thing that broke it open for good, not just her father's survey, but the pattern. Once the federal men knew to look, once they laid Cascade's filings beside the true dates, the whole rotten architecture stood exposed. Dozens of ranches, 2 counties, a scheme so wide and so old that everyone had stopped being able to see it the way a man stops seeing a fence he's walked past every day of his life. And Harlan Pierce, who had spent 11 years making the truth look like a lie, discovered the one thing he'd never planned for, that a federal record once opened could not be quietly closed. He ran, of course. A man like Pierce always runs. But he ran into a country that no longer belonged to him, because the moment the Surveyor General entered Abigail's name and the crime into the federal book, the bought valley began to come unbought. The sheriff who'd held a warrant on her found himself explaining to federal investigators why he'd posted a bond on a witness to a federal fraud. The recorder whose stamp had blessed 100 forgeries suddenly could not remember whose hand had guided his pen. Men who'd taken Cascade's envelopes for a decade discovered all at once that the company was a sinking ship, and that the fastest way off a sinking ship is to name the men who built it. Pierce was taken at a railway junction 60 miles from the capital with a valise of company money and a ticket east by a United States Marshal who did not care one whit whose county he was standing in. Abigail was there when they brought him through the capital in irons. She hadn't planned to be. But word came that they had him, and she found she needed to see it with her own eyes, needed to stand in a public place and watch Harlan Pierce, who had ruined her father and framed her and hunted her 1,000 miles, walk past her in chains. He saw her. Of course he saw her. And even in irons even finished, the smile came back for one last time. "Loud," Pierce said as they walked him past. "You beat me loud. I never thought you had it in you." A pause. The old flat eyes measuring her one final time. "Your father tried to beat me quiet. It's the only reason you're standing there, and he's in the ground." And Abigail Turner, who 3 years ago would have flinched, who 6 months ago would have run, looked Harlan Pierce full in the face and did not give him 1 inch. "My father wasn't quiet because he was weak," she said. "He was quiet because he still believed men like you were the exception. I know better now. And that's the thing you never understood, Harlan. You didn't teach me to be afraid. You taught me exactly how you win, and then I used it to bury you." She stepped back. "Enjoy the ride east. I hear the record means something there too." She turned and walked away, and she did not look back. And behind her the marshals led Harlan Pierce out of her life and into a federal courtroom 1,100 miles away, where 11 years of forgeries waited to be read into evidence, one honest survey at a time. The Cascade Land and Water Company did not survive the winter. The water rights were restored, not just Colt's, but all of them. That was the thing Abigail had understood in the barn that Pierce never had. That one honest survey in the right room was a loose thread, and the whole cloth came apart once it was pulled. Ranch by ranch, valley by valley, the federal land office unwound the forgeries and handed men back the water their fathers had filed on honest and had it stolen in the dark. Old families who'd sold out cheap and moved on couldn't be made whole. But the ones still hanging on, the stubborn ones, the ones like Colt, who'd been too pig-headed to die quiet, they got their creeks back, every one. And the foreclosure on Red Canyon Ranch was canceled. It happened without ceremony, which was somehow the sweetest part. A letter from the bank, terse and grudging, informing Mr. Colton Brennan that in light of the restored water rights and the corrected valuation of the property, the auction scheduled for September had been withdrawn. Colt read it standing on his own porch, and he read it twice, and then he handed it to Wesley without a word. The old foreman read it, and his eyes went wet the way they had in the barn, and he handed it back and said only, "Your daddy would have liked to see this day." "He is seeing it," Colt said, "some way or other." Hot. Duffy came home 3 days after the chase on a borrowed horse, having lost his own to a lameness. He'd ridden it into leading 6 company men clean across the county and losing them in the breaks exactly as he'd sworn he would. He walked into the yard grinning like a fool and half dead on his feet, and Abigail crossed the whole distance at a dead run and threw her arms around a 19-year-old boy who'd nearly gotten himself killed carrying blank paper so that she could carry the truth. "You could have died," she said into his shoulder, furious and weeping at once. "You stupid brave boy, you could have died." "Aw, ma'am." Duffy went red to his ears, but he didn't let go. "You fixed my hands. Weren't nothin'." She pulled back and held him by both shoulders. "It was everything," she said. "Don't you ever let anybody tell you it was nothing. You bought us the road, Duffy. Every rancher in 2 counties who gets their water back, they got it because a boy nobody expected anything from rode a good horse into the ground on the East Road. That's not nothing. That's the whole story." Duffy didn't have any words for that. But he stood up a little straighter, and he stood up straighter for the rest of his life, and years later, an old man himself. He would still tell the tale of the morning. He led the company off the East Road, and every time he told it, he'd say the same thing at the end. "She said it was the whole story, and she was the only one ever made me feel like I was in it." The ranch changed after that, and the valley changed with it. It did not happen all at once the way things happen in stories. It happened the way real things happen, slow and unevenly, and with a great deal of ordinary work. But it happened. The restored irrigation ditch that first promised Colt's father had dug by hand and Abigail had raised from the dead ran clean and full through 2 seasons and doubled the north pasture's carry. And then Abigail showed the neighbors how she'd done it, and old cuts that everyone had given up for dead came back to life up and down the valley. The men who'd left Red Canyon when the wages stopped heard the ranch was breathing again and drifted back 1 and 2 at a time, and Colt took them on because there was work now and a reason to do it. But the deepest change was the one Abigail worked without anyone quite noticing, the way she'd always worked, never ordering, just doing the thing until doing it became the way things were done. She set up proper books and taught Wesley to keep them, and then taught the neighbors' sons to keep theirs, so that no rancher in Red Canyon would ever again be poor the way Colt had been poor, with money in his coat and no notion which pocket. She started a shared supply store so that a bad year for one family didn't have to mean ruin. She organized the women of the valley to put up food against the winters and the men to lend equipment across property lines instead of each ranch clawing alone at the same hard ground. The Cascade Land and Water Company had spent 11 years teaching the valley that every rancher stood alone, that your neighbor's water was your loss, that the only law was the strongest paper. Abigail Turner spent the years after teaching it the opposite, that a valley that stood together could not be picked apart one desperate ranch at a time. That was the real defeat of everything Pierce had built. Not the courtroom, not even the water. It was that she took a valley the company had taught to distrust itself, and she taught it ranch by ranch and season by season to be a valley again. Chapitre pour moi. There came an evening when the worst was long behind them, and the ranch had settled into its new and better rhythm, that Colt Brennan walked out onto his porch and found Abigail already there. She was sitting where she always sat now, in a chair by the rail, watching the light go off the ridge the way she liked to. She'd stopped being a hired hand a good while back, though there'd never been a day anyone marked it. She'd simply become, over the turning of the seasons, the person the ranch was unimaginable without. The men called her ma'am with a respect that had nothing to do with wages. Wesley called her daughter when he thought no one heard. Colt stood a moment in the doorway looking at her. Then he carried out the thing he'd been keeping in the back room since morning. A rocking chair new, made its wood still pale and smelling of the plain, and he set it down beside hers close, and he sat. For a while neither of them said anything. There'd never been any need between them to fill a silence. "I've been meaning to say a thing," Colt said finally, "for a long time, and I keep finding reasons not to on account of it's not an easy thing to say." Abigail didn't look over. "Then say it plain. You're bad at everything else." He laughed low. Then he went quiet, and when he spoke again, the humor had gone out of it, replaced by something that had taken him a year and more to find the courage for. "That first night," he said, "I gave you the worst choice of your life, the porch or the bed. I've thought about it every day since how a man that low even finds the words, and I've never once been able to make my peace with it. It's the worst thing I ever did to a living soul, and I did it to the best one that ever walked up my road." The light moved off the ridge. Somewhere down by the barn, a horse blew, and one of the returned hands laughed at something, and the ordinary evening went on around them. Abigail was quiet a long moment. "No," she said. Colt turned. No, it wasn't the worst thing." She was watching the last of the light, and her voice had gone soft and certain, in a way he'd learned meant she'd thought about a thing for a long time, and arrived somewhere true. "I've had a long while to sit with that night, Colt. Longer than you, maybe because I was the one lying on the boards. And I've come to understand something you haven't." She turned then and looked at him, and there was no wound left in her face at all, only that fierce, clear thing that had walked into a federal hall and refused to be erased. "You didn't give me the worst choice of my life that night. You gave me the first real one. Abigail, let me finish. I've been 3 years running before I got to your road. 3 years of no choices, just running, just surviving, just staying invisible enough not to hang. I didn't choose anything in those 3 years. I just fled." Her voice didn't shake. It had gone past shaking into something steadier and harder one. "And then, a cruel, broken man stood on a porch and offered me 2 ugly options, and for the first time in 3 years, I got to decide who I was going to be, not who I was fleeing, who I'd be. And I chose the boards. I chose my own dignity over an easy, warm bed with a string on it. And you know what I found out, lying on those cold boards all night?" She held his eyes. "I found out I still had it. The dignity. After 3 years of running, I thought I'd lost every piece of myself, and it turned out I hadn't lost the piece that mattered, because when a man offered to buy it cheap, I still had enough left to say no." Colt could not speak. "You didn't give me the worst choice of my life," Abigail Turner said again, quiet and absolute. "You gave me the chance to choose who I wanted to become, and I've been becoming her ever since." She reached across the small space between the 2 chairs and took his rough hand in her own scarred one, the way he'd taken hers in the dark, by the wagon on the road to the Capitol. "So stop grieving that man on the porch. I already forgave him. The day I decided to stay and fix your ranch instead of taking the paper and running, that was the day I forgave him. You've just been slow to hear it." The last light left the ridge, and the 2 of them sat in the blue evening with their hands joined across the space between their chairs. An old cruelty finally laid to rest between a man and a woman who had each in their own way refused to be broken. "Marry me," Colt said. It wasn't planned. It came up out of him the way the truth always did with her, unpolished and plain. "I've been trying to find a pretty way to ask for a month, and there isn't one, so I'm just asking. Marry me, Abigail. Not for the ranch, not for cover, not for any reason, but that I can't imagine a single day of the rest of my life that I'd want to spend without you on this porch beside me." Abigail Turner smiled the whole smile, the one with nothing held back behind it. "On one condition," she said. "Name it." "That porch." She nodded at the boards where she'd spent her first freezing night. "From this day on, no soul who comes up this road tired and asking for shelter ever gets offered it out of cruelty again. Anyone who knocks gets a warm meal and a real bed and a place at our table. Because I know what it is to come up a stranger's road with nothing but a suitcase and no options left, and I know what one act of dignity can do for a person who's forgotten they have any." She squeezed his hand. "You give me that Colt Brennan, and I'll marry you tomorrow." "Done?" Colt said. "It's done. I swear it." And he kept that oath every day of the long life that followed. They were married before the first snow in the yard, with the whole valley there. The returned hands and the neighbors, whose water they'd won back, and Wesley standing up beside Colt, with tears he didn't bother to hide, and Duffy grinning fit to split. Elias Turner's survey hung framed in the main house, not hidden in a strongbox now, but on the wall where every soul could see it. The honest work of an honest man who'd died believing the truth written down plain would someday be enough, and who had, through his daughter at last, been proven right. The ranch prospered. The valley prospered with it. And down through all the years that came after, no traveler who knocked on the door of Red Canyon Ranch was ever again offered the porch out of rejection. It was offered only as a place to rest a moment before being welcomed inside, because the two people who lived there had learned each the hard way. The thing that no forged paper and no bought court and no cruel word spoken from a place of pain could ever change. That a ranch is not built by fences, nor by cattle, nor by the strongest deed in the county recorder's book, but by trust and dignity, and the courage to give a broken stranger the chance to choose who they will become.